Hi, I'm Steve Rosales, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Police Chief. With me today is the Police Chief, Chief James MacIsaac. How are you, Chief?
Hi, Steve. Good
nice
to see you
today, looking sharp in that uniform there.
Good to see you again.
Okay, so we're into October. It's the end of October. And, you know, I'm surfing the web, and I'm looking at community chat. Yesterday, today's 27 October, so yesterday I see, and I thought it was a joke, but it's a posting. Wanted, active civil service police officers interested in transferring to the Belmont Police Department. And it's from the Belmont Police Department seeking transfers. So
Yes.
What's going on, Chief? You got vacancies over there? What's happening over there at the department?
We do have a number of vacancies. So when I became chief in 2020, we were budgeted for 49. That's 49 sworn officers from myself down to the most junior patrol officer in the department. With the failed override, we lost one position, so now we're budgeted for 48. There was not, an individual was not laid off. We had a vacancy at that time, so the vacancy was taken from us. So right now, since then, we actually have 7 vacancies in the department. We have an officer who is into his second year of deployment with the National Guard. We have an officer who is on long-term disability, and then in addition to that, we have the vacancies created by people leaving. And we're trying to fill those vacancies through the civil service process. We called for a list, and we got 3 candidates from the list, 3 Belmont residents. They're all in the academy now, and they're slated to graduate in January. We still, next year, we are going to have 5 additional vacancies with retirements in 2023. So we're trying to fill those vacancies right now. I only have, after calling for 2 civil service lists, I only have 2 candidates that are going through the background right now for those vacancies. So if you notice, I think I did say in that posting that we were trying to fill 5 vacancies. So the other option to us is when we exhaust a civil service list is that we put a request out for officers from other civil service departments to lateral to Belmont. We've had 2 officers lateral from Belmont to other departments in the last 2 years. We had one go to Easton PD and one go to Waltham PD. So, you know, when we have these vacancies in a department, there's all sorts of operational stresses and deficiencies that occur because we have, you know, the vacancy, our most important function is to provide patrol services to the community. Meaning when you call 911, we want to make sure we have officers that respond. Mm-hmm. So what you end up doing is some of your support services, like we've had a vacant detective position for a long time. Detectives are working very hard. They're the ones doing the backgrounds on these candidates. In addition to, you know, following up with breaking and entering, doing regular detective work. Our community services division, which works with the elderly, youth, people in crisis, we have 2 officers in there. They both have basically essentially been put back into patrol operations so that, you know, that we're not getting our full dollar's worth out of them in what their intended goal and function is.
Do they do both functions
at
that point? They try to do both, so.
They do both.
Putting I don't know, an 8-hour stuff in a 10-hour job in an 8-hour bag.
So how it works is if you're one of our community service officers, which I said we have 2, when you come into work that day, and if the staffing on the shift is down to minimum, which they count towards minimum, they function as a patrol officer in the car. In a fully staffed department, they would not count towards the minimum. You know, if we had a complement of 48, they would be able to plan their day. They could say, I'm going to the senior center for 3 hours tomorrow. You know, if they said, I'm going to the senior center for 3 hours on Tuesday, they would be able to keep that commitment. Now, if they were to say, I'm going to the senior center for 3 hours on Tuesday, they would have to tell the senior center, I might not be there. It depends what the shift looks like Tuesday morning. And so then they have to, if the shift's short, they have to function as a patrol officer on patrol.
Okay, so just so I got my math right here, so you're budgeted for 49, The override, so you're down to 48. You have 7 vacancies, so there's a reason I'm not an accountant, but 41? You have
Yeah.
a staff of 41?
Yes, yeah.
And so there's got to be, with sickness and vacation and training, and so how do you fill all that gap? Overtime?
Yeah, and you know, and that's what the stress I was talking about that comes in, the different operational stress. So you come over the 4th of July, right? And you know, your office is Steve Rosales, and you have the 4th of July off, and you're working 4 to 11 on the 3rd, and you come in and your car's loaded, you're ready to go on vacation with your family on the 4th, and guess what happens? Steve, you're not going home. You have to stay. You know, it's a forced overtime. And so, you know, you can deal with that once or twice, and, you know, they deal with it a lot. And when you get into these periods of holidays or when we have people on certain shifts that are out sick, you know, it creates a lot of stress. You come into work, you don't know if you're going home in 8 hours or if you're going home in 16 hours. We haven't had any occurrences yet where we've had to hold people over for a full 24 hours. But, you know, you can see where that, you know, somebody, you know, tries to plan for a vacation and they just can't take the time.
Yeah, well, people don't realize they do have lives, they do have families, and they have, you know, you know, they're police officers and do a very capable job, but they do have, you know, kids and wives and usual life. It's called life.
Yeah, and
right?
you know, you know, when we do pay overtime to them, which is good, but as a department manager, I want to make sure that our officers are rested, that they're on. You know, when you start working, you know, 2 back-to-back 16-hour shifts and things like that, you know, you're not yourself. I don't care who you are. I mean, I've done it. You're tired, and you know, you're just not yourself.
So, okay, so you've called for a couple of lists. So back in the day, the ancient times when I was a selectman, we called some lists, and our problem was we had too many candidates, and the problem was winnowing down the candidates. You're telling me we don't have any candidates.
We don't have any candidates.
Is that a problem? Is that a problem not just here? Is that sort of everywhere? People don't want to be police officers?
Well, it's a particular problem in Belmont because we don't have that age group that would matriculate or gravitate towards law enforcement work. And what you're talking about, Steve, when I was in college, I think it was in 1989, I took my first civil service test, and I think I was 32nd on the list in Belmont. Right now, in the last 10 years, if you took a civil service test to be a police officer in Belmont, you had nobody in competition. You were going to get an interview, and you were going to get a job if you're going to pass the background and the interviews. The 3 people that we have in the academy now, they were the only 3 Belmont people on the list that came in to sign, and so you know, they essentially got the job. The 2 people that I'm hiring right now, only one is a Belmont resident. The other one lives down in Easton, coincidentally enough, where another of our officers came from. So what happens is you get the list. It has your Belmont residents on it, which receive residential preference, and the next group is disabled veterans. So this last time around, we sent out a list with 72 names on it, and we had, out of that 72 names, we ended up with 2 candidates.
And then, of course, they can accept or not accept or get hired somewhere else.
Yeah, well, that's what,
you know,
when you
that's
get
the way it goes.
the disabled veterans, when you look at the person who's first on that list and they're sitting number 1 on the list in Cambridge, you know, they're not going to come to Belmont. So when I say we had a list of 72 names, and of those 72 names, we got 2 candidates, we didn't go, the majority, the overwhelmingly majority of people on that list didn't even respond to our notice for a position.
Okay, so your department is down. So obviously, you've alluded to it. You can't carry on all the functions or programs or things that you would like with a full complement of officers. So what are the type of things, other than the reduction of the community service or what you alluded to earlier, the double time or the double job description, but what would you like to, I'll put it this way, what would you be implementing, or what would you like to implement if you had a full complement of officers?
Well, one of the things we implemented back when I was an assistant chief is what we call as DDACs, which is data-driven approaches to crime, traffic, and safety. And
Everything's an acronym.
Yeah.
DDACs, okay.
DDACs, right? That's what it is. So what DDACs does, it's a great program. It's been proven to work. you take people's, people complain. Let's take an intersection like out here, Pleasant and Trapello, people are complaining about that intersection. So we take an officer or officers, right, when we have the staffing above minimum, and we say, you're going to sit at that intersection for an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, maybe depending on what it is, maybe it's 5 hours, and say you're going to do nothing but traffic enforcement. We're not going to bother you. That's all you're going to do is traffic enforcement. And the idea behind that is we can do two things. We can measure the outputs by looking at crash data at the intersection. We can see what times we should be there, what times we shouldn't be there if the officer was successful. But the third most important thing, and it's important for our officers and it's important for the community in terms of transparency, if somebody makes a complaint against the officer and feels as though they were unjustly stopped or whatever in that location, we can turn around and say, hey, this is why the officer was in that location. He just wasn't, or she just wasn't driving around looking for people to pull over. They were in this location for a reason. And you can even take that a step further. When we've had break-in and enterings, you can, in a community the size of Belmont, which is only 4 square miles, you can take the entire shift and say, or a majority of it, and say, we're going to saturate this area and make legal car stops in this area, with the notion that the person breaking into the houses is usually coming in a vehicle, which we found was the case. So we would be definitely doing more DDACs if we had more people on the street.
Okay.
But we don't. We attempt to do DDACs, and what usually happens is the officer's on the DDACs assignment, and evidently, eventually we have to call them away from the assignment.
You have something else, some other
Something
call
else
comes.
going on,
Exactly,
yeah, that they have to
exactly.
do.
Well, we got a couple minutes left in this particular segment. We can always come back on the next segment, but anything else that comes to mind that you might want to implement that you can't?
So I challenge the officers that work in our department all the time. I say, come up, come up with youth activities, come up with, things that we can do with the elderly, things that we can do here. We're going to start doing things, but I mean, it's challenging for the reasons that I spoke of. If we plan something that involves personnel, there's no, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to come through and show up in an event.
It was nice to see. We recently had Belmont Youth Services and DARE just had a touch-a truck, which I think was fabulously successful, probably the first of many of them. But the most, you had a great police presence. You had the fire department, all the trucks, but you had the motorcycle police officer. You had the prisoner transport vehicle, which looked fearsome to to some of the little kids. But it was a nice community outreach, and it's nice to be seen and to interact with, young families and young kids.
That was a great event, and I was surprised at the turnout. I couldn't believe how many kids were.
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
We're going to do that again.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm getting the wrap up for this particular segment of Ask the Police Chief, so keep that in mind. For those wanting to become a police officer, where do they go?
Well, the Massachusetts Civil Service, if you put in, if you do a Google search and say Massachusetts Civil Service exams, you're going to get to the state website that will direct you to the civil service exams. They're now giving the civil service police exams once every year. It used to be every 2 years, but they're doing it in the springtime now, so once a year in the spring, usually around April. Well,
you can do that, or I suppose call the non-emergency number. Or look on social media, and there'll be a post that'll tell you exactly how to do it.
Yeah.
So I can't believe you're putting out a want ad, but such is the state of things here in the town of Belmont, and a lot of places I would suggest.
Yeah, there's a lot of places that are having difficulty.
So, well, I appreciate your time here today, Chief.
All right.
We'll be back again with the next segment. You've been watching Ask the Police Chief with Chief James MacIsaac. I'm Steve Rosales, your host. Until next time, take care.